The Jets want to make some trades to try and get this team going again, but what actually makes sense for this team, and should the Jets even go for trades?
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to today's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support, especially in helping to make Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Tonight's episode, I want to talk a little bit about a bunch of trade stuff around the Jets. Yesterday, we sort of spoke about Winnipeg being interested in Jesperi Kotkaniemi, as well as sort of the Andrew Mangiapane links for now not really being super active. But amidst all of that, there's also been some news that Luke Schenn said he's open to a change of scenery for the Jets, and I think it starts to form a question of what should the Jets actually do with this team? Should they make trades? Who should they trade? What should they acquire? Or is there even a market for what they need? I want to dive into all of that and also sort of talk a little bit about timing, because I think the Jets are in a very interesting spot thanks to the standings in the league being very tight. This actually gives the Jets a surprising advantage over a lot of other teams, especially if the Jets are planning to sell. So I want to dive into all of that today, but did want to let you know first that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL wildcard round is here, and FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. Let's talk about the Jets and some of the rumors, right? So we talked yesterday about Jesperi Kotkaniemi and Andrew Mangiapane. For various reasons, you know my thoughts on that. I don't like making acquisitions for either player. With Mangiapane, he doesn't move the needle at all. And for, another 30-year-old who has another year after this, I just don't really understand the attraction. On paper, right, like Mangiapane, in the same way that I looked at Marchment, does technically improve the Jets. Maybe less so than Marchment does, but Mangiapane, if he were to return to form, could actually be a good Jets player. The thing with that is I don't want him to be so good that he also helps out the Jets' top 9 and puts them out of a tanking spot. I don't know that he would ever do something like that unless he were to collect his original Calgary form, but that seems pretty unlikely. The thing that would make some sense to me is if the Jets were trying to pump and dump, right? You give him a shot here in Winnipeg, you give him some ice time, you see if he can't maybe spark his offense, and then you maybe look to move him at another instance to a different team. But, I don't know that a lot of squads right now look at his extra year of term as particularly desirable. The only way that I would really see the Jets doing this is because they think Mangiapane actually moves the needle. They would want to bring him in and keep him, and I just don't really think that's a smart play. Even if it's cheap, I would want the Oilers to be the one paying Winnipeg to take this deal on. You exchange some picks and you upgrade one of your deeper ones for a higher pick this year and try and take advantage of Edmonton's desperation to make some cap space happen. So I don't really see that being a great avenue. And with Kotkaniemi, he's an okay bottom 6 guy, but he's signed for almost $5 million, and he's got a 4-year deal left. I don't really feel like that's particularly good for the Jets. There's a reason the Canes are trying to move on from him. They looked at his underlying metrics originally and thought that he was better than he was. They thought that he could be a middle 6 to top 6 center. Didn't really happen. Not really, underrated in a lot of ways. In fact, I think he probably was slightly overrated when he was acquired. And technically, Kotkaniemi could actually come to the Jets and rediscover some of his draft level talent, but I just don't really think that's a gamble worth taking. There's just too much money and time wrapped up into it, and that's a lot of money to find out whether or not somebody is capable of being the same player they once were ages ago. especially when Kakaniemi's kind of hovering around a 30-point career mark. Like, I don't really know that there's much more in his game that's been waiting to be, unleashed. You've got a guy in David Gustafson who kind of does some of the same things, a more defensively oriented two-way center, and Gus is even more physical, and yet Gus can't get out of the Moose. So what is the point really of acquiring a Kakaniemi unless, again, you get paid to take on his deal? Even then, I just don't like the lack of flexibility. He's not a 2C. One of the bigger and more interesting rumors now has been Dougie Hamilton. And if the Jets were to do something around a Hamilton deal, that's where you start getting my attention. Hamilton obviously has to do some wave stuff, and, there's a lot there. But if the Jets were to find a way to be able to potentially do, I don't know, some sort of facilitation as part of this deal, I would be very intrigued by that. Maybe you take on some salary from another team so that they can bring Hamilton on this season, at least for the year. And, you ride it out for a little bit, you get paid to take on a contract, and the other team gets Hamilton. I would be very intrigued by that. That's a conversation I'd be willing to have. In terms of guys that I would want the Jets to maybe poke around on, one thought I've had about a little bit, also from the Devils, is Dawson Mercer. Now, Mercer's not a big player in my mind that really moves the needle, but he could be an interesting middle six center for the Jets with some scoring talent. He's had a solid season. He's about a half a point per game pace this year. By all accounts, his 5v5 production has been okay. I think he's primarily played out wide these days, but he has, I believe in the past, played at center a long time ago. I just don't know if Mercer really moves the needle in the traditional sense, but he's a solid option. The Devils apparently kind of want him gone, and I don't think that he's making crazy money at the term that he's got to. He's got 1 year left. He's an RFA. He's just at $4 million a season. No trade protection. Feels like a very interesting kind of lower key target for the Jets to look at. Again, stylistically, I have some questions about Mercer. He's not my favorite player, but I could see him being the kind of lower risk option, and a guy who's been not beloved by the Devils front office that could be perhaps moved. Maybe you agree to take on Palat's salary for a year and send something back that's short term and expires this year to the Devils instead. So interesting potential maneuvers there. I think financially it is very tricky to make any of this happen in the immediate. But the Devils are a team that's desperate. And as more and more teams start falling out of the playoff race, that's where I think the Jets have a real advantage. If Winnipeg moves out some of the contracts that they've got right now, which they've got tons of 1 year deals that they can potentially sell to some contenders, I think they could become a very good team for other squads to send expiring deals to that they need to clear off space for before the trade deadline. And the Jets could probably restock their prospect system doing this beautifully. I think this is a fascinating year, especially because so many teams are compressed this year all together. It gives the Jets a unique advantage to be a big clearinghouse for squads that maybe can't afford to do this normally. So I think this is a fascinating time. I don't know that there's a lot out there that is immediately available for the Jets. I think the only way that they're going to know for certain is as we get closer to March, because there's just too many teams right now that are in the race. There's basically one team or two teams at most that have indicated any presence of mind to sell. The Jets are not yet one of them. So I think the timing isn't quite right to have a big acquisition unless something breaks out and the Jets can facilitate for another team. That's the big goal for me. I wonder what you would want the Jets to do if they were trading. Who would you target? Let me know in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. We've also heard some interesting rumblings that perhaps a Jets player or two wants a change of scenery. We'll chat about why Luke Schenn asking out could be the start of something bigger for Winnipeg coming right up. New year, big goals, and somehow even less time to cook. If you're trying to eat better but don't want to spend hours grocery shopping or meal prepping, Factor makes it easy. These are fully prepared meals designed by dietitians and crafted by chefs so you can eat well without all the work. Factor meals are made with quality, fresh, functional ingredients, lean proteins, colorful veggies, whole foods, and healthy fats. No refined sugars, no artificial sweeteners, and no refined seed oils. Just real food that fits your real goals, whether that's eating healthier, managing calories, or getting more protein. The meals are always fresh, never frozen, and they're ready in about 2 minutes. No prep, no stress. It's easy, and they have tons of meal options. There's 100 rotating meals every week, including high protein, calorie smart, Mediterranean, and even GLP-1 support options. They've always got something for everyone, and it makes sticking to your goals so much easier because the food is ready to go for you. Head to factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 off and use code LockedOnNHL50 off to get 50% off your first Factor box plus free breakfast for 1 year. That's factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 off, code LockedOnNHL50 off. Make healthy eating easier with Factor. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we're chatting a little bit about some of the trade waters that continue to be disturbed. Just now, we were chatting that I think for the Jets, obviously acquiring players might be their goal, but I don't really think that there's anyone out there right now that's presently available that makes sense. I think there's maybe one or two guys that I could think of sort of under the radar marks that maybe you make a play for, but the hardest thing for Winnipeg is that no one is selling. And it's why in a little bit I want to chat about the timing of when stuff might start to shake out. But until such time as something really tasty pops up, I think Winnipeg would be better served being as flexible as possible. And one thing that has started to kind of creep up is as the Jets are kind of in second to last, players are going to want to start perhaps seeking greener pastures. And I can't really say that I'm upset about that pending who it is. One of the first names that's come up is Luke Schenn. Luke Schenn has said he's open to a change of scenery, which this isn't the first time we've actually heard about that. This past summer, I recall somebody saying that he wasn't the biggest fit. Now, at the time, I didn't read a ton into it. Schenn was traveling a lot to Nashville to see his family, and so there was that. But I didn't really know how much of he didn't feel it was the best fit was coming from Schenn himself, from the Jets, from his family. I just wasn't sure what to make of it. And no one really followed up on that, after that comment. So I sort of put it in the back of my mind, cataloged it maybe for future interest. And now that future interest might actually be here. Schenn, saying he wants a change of scenery is basically him saying he wants out, which is interesting, right? I think, losing Schenn is not a loss for the Jets. If anything, any assets that they can salvage out of his trade would be fantastic. He has unfortunately been one of the worst players I've ever seen for the Jets. Super nice guy, absolutely fantastic locker room leader. He just doesn't have the skating legs anymore. And I think that's been a really big challenge for him as, he's 36 now. It's hard for guys, especially the kind of player that he is, to keep that pace up. He'll still deliver thunderous hits. He still blocks shots, but a lot of what you need in modern day defenders is mobility and the, puck transition skills. And that's just not something that Luke really specializes in. There might be a way on another team for him to be more usable for them, but for the Jets, unfortunately, Schenn just doesn't fit at all. Arniel loves him, I'm pretty sure, but I don't think it necessarily is a relationship that's actually beneficial to what the Jets need out of their third D pairing. I usually look at, in previous years, Logan Stanley as one of the chief offenders for defensive struggles, and Stanley, comparatively speaking, has been a saint compared to, Schenn's work this year. So, Luke wants out. I think it makes sense. And it just for a lot of reasons, I think for his own, family's sake and stuff, maybe moving closer to home would make sense. Interestingly, we are also seeing that sort of the Schenn connection being drawn as both the center from Braden's perspective and, on the defensive side, Luke, maybe being a pair going to somewhere, right? Another team, right? Both guys get traded. Both dudes get moved to the same team. How does that happen? Who facilitates it? What makes it possible? All that stuff. That is a conversation that could be really fun for the Jets. They send him to be with his brother. They leverage the deal. They get paid a lot more than they should. And perhaps that awful trade deadline of like a second and a fourth starts to look a little more distant with a good return. Now, I wouldn't really expect Schenn to fetch you more than like a third or a fourth round pick at best. I mean, that's really at best. And from what it sounds like, the market expectation is probably a fourth or less. Um, Honestly, just moving the salary off and opening up a roster spot for a guy like Salamonson or maybe another forward would probably be helpful. Um, I don't know if the Fleury and Miller trades will necessarily change the thinking here, but like at the end of the day, Schenn probably just needs to go. I think that's the bigger question for the team, and it also gives him a chance to go to a contender and perhaps chase one more ring. He's already got some title stuff thanks to I think his Tampa Bay time, so he's got that. Now, he's kind of in the twilight of his career. This may very well be one of his last NHL seasons. Let him go chase a ring somewhere else on a contender and be that sort of big presence on the back end for a team that can afford to have him. But I just don't think that's where the Jets are right now. And as he kind of moves his way out, I wonder if anyone follows suit. Nyquist, I think, is probably not really a fit for the Jets. He's a solid ice tilter. I think he's been a reasonable depth player. He doesn't score, and I think that's been a real problem. He's a little unlucky, to be frank. He's had some goals chalked off that should have been goals, but thanks to an offsides, kind of ruined the fun. But yeah, I mean, he's kind of expensive for what he offers. If the Jets retain some salary on him, maybe they can make him a more appealing option for like a third round pick or less. Probably on the left side again. I don't see him being super desirable. As we kind of roll through the list, though, there is a name that I'm kind of wondering about, right? Toews, Jonathan Toews, obviously playing for his hometown team. Big deal, big revenue builder for everyone. Does Toews finish his season as a Jet? If he doesn't, I think this whole Perfetti jump that we're seeing with Toews could be really beneficial by the time the trade deadline rolls around. A pumped value Toews who looks a lot more like a middle six to top six center, thanks to maybe his scoring rates jumping up and some of the work from his line mates. I think that could be really helpful for Winnipeg. Suddenly, Toews looks like a real trade-worthy asset. Now, I think the Jets should not be beholden to the idea that he has to stay for the whole year. If you can move Toews' contract to a contender and let him, ring chase with somebody and sort of pump his value, I think that works for both parties. Toews got the chance to play for his hometown team, didn't work out this season. He can go to another team, be perhaps a big contributor on their playoff run. He'll bring that Stanley Cup leadership and experience. He'll bring the playoff know-how. And I think it would, for the Jets, be a little more beneficial because then you can start to call up some of your reserves from the Moose and give more ice time to guys like Lambert, Yeager, Chibrikov, Zhilkin, players of that caliber who wouldn't ordinarily get the chance to play. You might start to have that become your transition point for next season. I don't know that the Jets are really at that stage yet, and Toews isn't really inclined to go anywhere just yet, as far as I know. But, given some of the body language and some of the frustration expressed in his interviews, I wonder how, open to moving he would really be. It wouldn't shock me if, a contender comes calling, he is willing to have that conversation a little more openly. And again, I wouldn't begrudge him of it. I would support it. I'd endorse it. And I think from the Jets' perspective, it'd make a lot of sense. The last guy, and this one is a little more painful for me, but, Morgan Barron, does he get trade calls? He's not really got much time left as a Jet, at least on paper. Maybe the Jets extend him in the near future, but he's been a really reliable middle six presence for this team, but he's kind of capped out in terms of his deployments. I don't think he's going to be used too much more. He's got a year left after this season. He's on a bargain bin deal at just under $2 million. Really versatile player. You could probably get a killing for him, a lot more than you think. As one of your speediest skaters with a great shot, really good penalty killing work and versatility to play multiple positions, he's kind of a unicorn for bottom sixes. And he's 27, right? He's at an age where if the Jets start turning over roster spots, a guy like him being moved could not only help out your prospect pool, but again, it opens up roster spots for other players. And it has nothing to do with his performance. I think he's been one of this team's most consistently strong performers. I think I really enjoy watching him play, but I also understand if, moving his contract ends up being a really big windfall for Winnipeg in a way that you don't expect. He could get you like a Tanner Jeannot sort of thing, couple of picks, maybe more than you'd expect. And because the market right now is very limited in terms of guys who are available and teams that are selling, he might be one of the biggest options to acquire in terms of a very solid budget priced middle six guy in terms of cap hit and stuff. He could be one of the best value trade options when it comes to adding some really skilled depth to a true contender. So would love to hear your thoughts on this. Would Barron be a guy that you think makes some sense to move? Who else would you think about potentially shifting? You've got Niederreiter, Iafallo, you have Nyquist, you have Taves. I mean, there's all sorts of contracts that could potentially bring Jets some really major assets in a way that I don't think I was anticipating coming into the season. But curious to know what you think. Let me know if I'm off my rocker. Drop your comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Amidst all this, though, I do want to talk about timing. When should the team look to sell? Who should they buy or when should they buy? And what makes sense for how the season might play out? We'll talk about that all coming right up. New year, new systems. This is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our businesses and think there has to be a better way. And there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades you can make. That's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Quo, the smarter way to run your business communications. When your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. With Quo, your whole team can call and text from one shared business number so nothing gets missed. Everyone sees the full conversation thread, and it makes replies faster and more personal. And Quo's smart AI tools automatically log calls, summarize conversations, and highlight next steps so details never slip through the cracks. It's no surprise Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses from solo operators to growing teams. Make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/lockedonnHL. That's QUO.com/lockedonnHL. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. Hey friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us at tonight's show as we're just wrapping up with some thoughts on trade timelines for the Jets over the next few weeks and months. Right now, I think the Jets are in a very unique position. Bottom of the league. No one outside of like one team has indicated they're willing to sell. Everyone thinks they're still in some sort of a race because of the standings compression and schedule compression. The Olympics have had a very outsized impact, I feel, on this year's playoff race. And so many teams aren't throwing the towel in just yet, and that includes the Jets. I think Winnipeg should think longer and harder about this for one reason. If you are the only team that's selling, you control the market at that moment. And for the Jets, that could be one of the biggest benefits to them getting some poor sucker out there to overpay for assets. If a team gets really desperate to make a move, the Jets have the opportunity to take them to the cleaners and do it first before everyone else starts diluting that pool, right? If the supply goes up, the Jets' demand will go down. And I think this is where Winnipeg right now has all of the cards in their hand. They don't seem to yet want to play it, but I promise you, if they preempt this and they're smart about it, I think this could be one of the more successful trade deadlines the Jets have had in many years. Now, I don't mean that they're necessarily going to acquire talent. I think the Jets will bring in somebody or two. I just don't know who that is yet. And I'm curious to know how committed they are to some of the existing names. Will Logan Stanley get traded? I think that's a huge test for me. Luke Schenn's probably out the door here pretty soon. Next few weeks, I'd imagine he gets a call from somewhere. But a Stanley could be moved. I don't know how the Jets feel about Barron's performance. I think he's been great for the team, but he also is one of your more valuable trade targets and options to potentially bring in some big assets, bigger than you probably think. And for Winnipeg, holding all of that right now in their hands, they have a real opportunity to make some hay. This Jets team needs to restock the cupboards and do so quickly. They have a chance to come out of the next couple of drafts really overhauling this entire core and setting the stage for the Jets' future brilliantly. You could be in the mix for a top 3 pick. Maybe you find a way to add a higher second. Maybe you somehow, against all odds, even add another first at the end of this year's first round. That would be unbelievable for this team. And, obviously, late first round picks may not be highly impactful NHLers by the end of it, but giving yourself as many lottery tickets as you possibly can to support this group, I think would give the Jets an undeniable edge going forward. Hellebuck will still probably be Hellebuck for several years to come. Scheifele should still be good for a few more. Connor should still be good for a few more at least. There's a realistic potential here for the Jets, if they play their cards right, to turn this thing around relatively quickly. But, I don't know if I'm quite trusting enough of the Jets to reach that point. I would love to be, but I still need to see them do and think about this in some, more practical terms than they've demonstrated so far. From what we've heard, they're just starting to have the conversation of the direction of this team, how things have gone, why they ended up here. So that's positive. Like, don't get me wrong. I think it's good that they're having this conversation, but you kind of need to start having it faster and start mapping out what you need to do going forward quickly. Because the league doesn't wait for you. And as the season rolls on, more and more teams are going to start, jumping into this pot and probably offloading some talent. So if the Jets can beat other teams there first, I think that would be a huge advantage for what the Jets ultimately need to do this coming draft and beyond. That makes me wonder if, perhaps Winnipeg's better time to sell is just a bit before Milan. Get in and potentially move some contracts, send them to some contenders, maybe keep 1 or 2 assets in store for after injury strike. Milan could potentially change some of the contenders' plans. We'll have to wait and see. We've not had an Olympics like this in forever, and we already know that injuries have hit teams to start the season, especially with the congestion of the schedule. So what's going to happen after Milan? That could be a very prime opportunity for Winnipeg to keep some of their big assets for that team that is suddenly down a middle or top 6 player, and the Jets have a Morgan Barron or something to drop on them. Who knows, right? This is an exciting time in some ways for the Jets. Perhaps a little nervy because I don't know if I trust Chevy to navigate this properly. I'd love to in the past because he used to. And I think in previous years, I would have had zero question about how he navigates this, but I think my questions have grown the past year or two. So this is a really fascinating point for the Jets. It's a more interesting season than maybe I expected. I think there's a lot that they can do. Let's just hope that they're smart about their decisions and think long and hard about every avenue before committing. Let me know your feelings, though. Let me know which way you're leaning with this. Drop your feelings about the season and what Chevy should do in the comment section on YouTube or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's show, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. Tomorrow we'll have a preview of Winnipeg versus the Islanders. That's coming up on Tuesday evening. The Islanders just sank 9 past the Devils a couple days ago, so should be a tough game. But like I said, that's all the time that we have. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets go.